Rain was falling on the cold world of Vareth Prime, the kind of rain that carried the smell of metal and sorrow. Inside the marble court, hundreds of alien eyes watched the trial of a widow named Cerise Valin. She stood in silver shackles, her head bowed, her pale blue skin marked with bruises from rough handling. The judges spoke in deep mechanical tones, their voices echoing like thunder. They said she was guilty of emotional influence in her husband's rebellion against the Galactic Empire. She had not fought, she had not killed, but she had loved a man who dared to question the rulers, and that, to them, was enough. When the sentence came, the court grew silent. Exile to the human colonies, the judge said coldly. Permanent transfer to human supervision. A murmur spread through the crowd. Even criminals feared such a punishment. Humans were called savages in alien cities. Strong but simple, kind but unpredictable. To send a widow, there was to erase her from civilization. Cerise did not cry. She only whispered a single word. Understood. Guards pulled her away, their armor clanging against the floor. Outside, transport ships waited, engines glowing red like eyes in the dark. She was placed in a small cell with only a metal bench and a cracked window. The stars beyond it looked cold and distant, like memories that no longer belonged to her. Days passed during the journey. She was given nutrient paste, metal cups of water, and a blanket that smelled of dust. Each night she thought of her husband, executed for loving her. Each night she told herself she would not break. When the ship finally landed on Earth Settlement 9, the door opened with a hiss of air. The sky here was orange with dust, and the air felt thick and heavy. A human soldier stood waiting, tall, scarred, wearing a brown jacket that looked older than peace itself. Elias Ward, the officer beside him said. You are her keeper now. Elias only nodded, his face unreadable, his voice low. I'll take her, he said. Cerise followed him down a dirt path lined with broken machines and silent homes. The colony looked half dead, filled with empty streets and wind that whistled through torn banners. Elias's house was small, one floor, metal roof, flickering lights, but it was cleaner than the prison ship. He opened the door and stepped aside. You can stay in that room, he said quietly, pointing to a small chamber with a bed. She nodded, her voice trembling. Thank you. He didn't answer. For hours she sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the strange human noises outside, engines, tools, the hum of life so different from her own. Later, when she went to the kitchen, she saw him sitting by a window, staring at an old photograph. He didn't notice her at first. Or maybe he pretended not to. In that photo was a younger Elias, smiling beside a woman and a child. Cerise understood, even without words. They were gone. That night, the rain came again. Soft but endless, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the wind drag sand across the walls. She thought of her punishment. How ironic that both she and her keeper were ghosts of their own lives. In the morning, Elias handed her a small device. Work badge, he said. You can help in the greenhouse if you want food credits. She nodded. Surprised by the small mercy, the greenhouse was filled with strange earth plants. Green and fragile, she touched the leaves carefully, feeling warmth through her fingers. She worked quietly, while humans nearby whispered. That's the alien widow, one man muttered. The Empire dumped her here. Cerise ignored them, her heart calm for the first time in months. She had something to do besides wait for death. When she returned home, Elias was fixing a broken generator, his hands steady, his expression cold. You worked hard, he said softly, almost surprised at his own words. I try to be useful, she answered. He nodded once, then went back to his tools. Days turned to weeks. and their silence became a strange kind of peace. Sometimes she would hum an alien song while cooking, and he would pause, just listening. Sometimes he would leave food outside her door, pretending it was by mistake. One evening, lightning struck near the colony, cutting power to half the houses. Cerise rushed outside to help Elias reconnect the lines. Wind whipped her hair across her face. Rain soaked her clothes, but she didn't stop. When the power came back, Elias looked at her, really looked, and saw not a criminal, but someone who refused to give up. "Good work," he said quietly. She smiled, small but real. "Thank you." Inside, the lights flickered softly, warm against the cold night. Elias went to his chair by the window. Cerise sat near the small fire. Neither spoke. Yet the silence was no longer heavy. Somewhere deep inside, both began to feel it, the faint pulse of something new. Not forgiveness, not yet love, but the fragile beginning of understanding. The Empire had sentenced them both to solitude. But destiny, silent and stubborn, had other plans. And in that forgotten corner of the galaxy, under the endless reign of Vareth Prime, two broken lives had just taken their first step toward healing. Elias Ward woke before sunrise, as he always did. His body still trained by years of war and habit, he made coffee in silence, the bitter smell filling the small metal house. Outside, the colony was quiet except for the hum of distant engines and the whistle of wind through the dust fields. He had lived alone for so long that silence had become his only companion. Now there was another presence, soft footsteps, gentle movement, the alien widow who had been sent to him. Cerise Valen, she kept to herself, working long hours in the greenhouse or cleaning corners of the house no one had touched for years. Elias had not asked her to, but she did it anyway, like someone trying to earn a place that didn't exist. He respected that, though he would never say it. War had taken too much from him, his wife, his daughter, his peace. When the Empire declared victory, they forgot the soldiers who made it happen. Humans like Elias were left behind, broken, rebuilding worlds no one cared about. When they assigned him an alien criminal to supervise, he had felt nothing but disgust. But now, weeks later, he saw something different. Cerise was quiet, polite, and patient, never complaining even when people in the colony treated her like dirt. He once saw her being refused food at the market. Without a word, she walked away, her head high. Later that night, he placed extra rations on her table without telling her where they came from. She knew, but she didn't say anything. The next morning, she left a small bundle of herbs near his tools, saying softly, "For pain." He had old scars that hurt when it rained. That was the first time he realized. She noticed things, not just tasks, but feelings. The days passed, and they fell into a rhythm. Elias repaired machinery for the colony, while Cerise managed the greenhouse, keeping crops alive in the harsh wind. Sometimes she would speak to him in short sentences. "Elias, this wire burns," or "the roots are too dry." Her voice was soft, almost shy, but it carried strength. One afternoon, while repairing a solar pump, she sliced her palm open on a jagged pipe. Blood shimmered blue under the sunlight. Elias rushed over before he could think. "Hold still," he said, wrapping her hand with a clean cloth. She flinched, but didn't pull away, when he looked into her silver eyes. He saw pain, but not fear. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. "A little," she whispered. "But pain reminds me I am still alive." Something in those words struck him. He nodded slowly, pressing the cloth tighter. When she looked up again, their eyes met, human brown and alien silver, and neither looked away. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He kept hearing her voice. The calm way she had said she was still alive. He wondered if he was, at dawn. He found her outside, watching the sunrise. The horizon glowed red and gold, the first warmth breaking through the storm clouds. "You wake early," he said, his tone softer than usual. "I don't sleep much," she replied. "Your world dreams too loudly." He almost smiled at that. Later, at the colony workshop, other men whispered about him. "Ward's gone soft," one laughed, taking in that alien like a pet. Elias ignored them. But anger burned in his chest. That evening, when he returned home, Cerise was scrubbing the floor, her hands raw and trembling. "You don't have to do that," he said. She looked up, startled. "I want to," he sighed, walking past her. But before he reached the door, she added quietly, "It makes the house feel alive again." He stopped then, standing still for a long moment. Maybe she didn't realize what those words did to him. Because for years, his home had been nothing but walls filled with ghosts. And now, somehow, it was breathing again. That night, rain fell again, soft and steady. Cerise stood by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass. Elias brought 2 cups of tea and placed one beside her. She blinked in surprise. "For me?" He nodded. "Don't waste it." She smiled faintly. "Thank you." They drank in silence, the air between them calm but heavy with unspoken thoughts. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, and for a second, light filled the room. She flinched slightly, and he saw it, the faint tremor in her hands. "You hate storms," he said. "They remind me of fire," she whispered. "The night they burned my home." He looked down, feeling something twist inside him. He didn't know what to say, so he simply said, "You're safe here, for a moment." The world seemed still. Cerise looked at him, her eyes soft. "No one ever said that to me before." Then she turned back to the rain, and he stayed beside her. They didn't need to speak. In that quiet night, something fragile but powerful began to form. Not love, not yet, but the start of trust. Elias Ward, once a soldier of war, had become a silent guardian again. And the alien widow he had been forced to keep was no longer just a burden. She was becoming his reason to wake up. The Empire had sentenced her to live under human supervision. But in truth, both of them were prisoners of the past. And maybe, just maybe, they had finally found the first crack of light inside their darkness. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet between them began to change. It was no longer heavy with fear, but gentle, like a song without words. Cerise Vallon rose early each morning, tending the greenhouse with careful hands. Elias Ward would check the perimeter fences, fix machines, and return by midday. They shared meals sometimes, sitting across from each other in the dim light of the house. Neither said much, but silence had stopped feeling empty. One morning, as she was planting seedlings, Cerise noticed Elias struggling with a broken tool. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Here, let me help." He looked up, surprised, then handed it over. Her alien fingers moved quickly, twisting wires and adjusting the grip. Within minutes, the machine started humming again. Elias blinked. "How did you?" She smiled slightly. "My husband taught me once, before the war." He didn't answer, but the corners of his mouth softened. For the first time, he realized how much life she carried beneath her quiet surface. That evening, he found her in the kitchen trying to cook a human meal. The smell was terrible. The pan smoked, and she waved her hands helplessly. Elias coughed, laughing for the first time in years. "You're trying to kill me, aren't you?" he said, half joking. Cerise bit her lip. "I thought it needed more fire." He shook his head, still smiling. "Less fire. More patience." That small laughter filled the house like sunlight. Later that night, as she cleaned up, she caught herself smiling too. The colony, however, was not as kind as Elias. Whispers followed her everywhere. Alien, criminal, widow. When she walked through the market, people turned away, children stared. Their mothers pulled them close. Elias saw it one day while delivering spare parts. He stepped between her and a group of men mocking her. "That's enough," he said, his voice sharp and steady. One of them sneered. "You protecting her now, Ward? She's not one of us." Elias met his gaze coldly. "She works harder than any of you." The men grumbled and walked away. Cerise stood frozen, her heart racing. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. He turned to her, his eyes calm. They needed to hear it. That night, she couldn't sleep. No one had ever stood up for her before. She sat by the window, watching the colony lights flicker. In another world, perhaps, this would have been home. A few days later, trouble came. Someone threw a stone through their window, shattering the glass in the middle of the night. Cerise screamed, startled. Elias was already awake. His hand on his old blaster, he rushed outside. But whoever had done it was gone when he returned. She was standing barefoot among the glass. Trembling, he reached for her shoulder gently. "Don't move. You'll cut yourself." She looked up, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Why do they hate me so much?" He didn't know how to answer. "Because they fear what they don't understand," he said quietly, picking up the broken pieces one by one. Cerise knelt to help him, their hands brushing for a second. That single touch made them both stop. It was strange. In that small ruined room, surrounded by shards of glass, she felt safer than she ever had. When dawn came, Elias replaced the window himself. He didn't speak about it again, but he started walking her to the market every morning. Some people still stared, but others began to look away out of respect. Their small house became a world of its own, half human, half alien, and yet whole. In the evenings, she would hum softly while he worked with his tools. Sometimes he would pause, just listening. "Your song," he said one night. "What does it mean?" She smiled faintly. "It means hope," he nodded, though he didn't say that it made him feel the same. The next day, the colony power grid failed. Lights went out across the settlement. Panic spread, and people shouted for help. Elias grabbed his toolkit and ran into the storm. Cerise followed without hesitation. Together, they crawled through tunnels filled with smoke and sparks, fixing wires and resetting relays. When the lights finally came back on, cheers echoed through the colony. A child pointed at Cerise, whispering, "The alien helped." For the first time, people didn't look at her with fear, but with gratitude. That night, as the colony celebrated, she sat outside the house. Looking up at the stars, Elias joined her quietly, sitting beside her without a word. "You saved them," he said softly. "We saved them," she corrected. He smiled at that, his tired eyes softer than usual. For a while, neither spoke, the wind carrying dust across the silent field. She turned to him, voice low. "Do you ever think the sentence was wrong?" He shook his head. "Maybe it wasn't punishment at all." Ceres looked down. Unsure how to respond, Elias added quietly, "Maybe it was a second chance, for both of us." The stars shimmered above them, bright and endless. For the first time since her exile, Cerise didn't feel like a prisoner. And for the first time in years, Elias Ward didn't feel alone. They were two broken souls bound by fate and circumstance. Yet somewhere in the quiet between their worlds, something stronger than chains had begun to grow. Something the Empire could never control. Something called trust. The sky over the colony turned dark and heavy, the color of old steel. Winds howled through the streets, carrying the taste of dust and fear. Every screen in the settlement flashed the same warning. Severe storm front approaching. Seek shelter immediately. Elias Ward stood by the window, watching the horizon twist into chaos. Cerise Valen came running from the greenhouse, her clothes soaked in dust and rain. "The crops, they'll be destroyed," she said. Breathless, Elias shook his head. "Forget the crops. We need to stay alive." But she didn't move, her eyes fixed on the field. "If we lose them, the colony will starve." He grabbed her arm gently. "Then we'll plant again. Now get inside." Lightning struck nearby. The flash lighting up her face, streaked with worry. She followed him back into the house, her heart pounding like thunder. The storm hit within minutes. Winds tore through walls. Roofs rattled. Power died. Elias moved fast, sealing windows, pushing furniture against doors. Cerise held a lantern while he worked, her fingers trembling as the wind screamed outside. Then came the sound of an explosion, the east generator. Without it, the colony would lose power. Air filters and heat? Elias grabbed his coat. "I have to go," Cerise blocked his way. "You'll die out there." He looked at her, his jaw tight. "If I don't go, everyone will." He opened the door, the storm slamming into him like a living beast. "Stay inside," he shouted, and vanished into the dust. Cerise stood frozen for a moment, staring into the storm that swallowed him. Then she ran to the comms panel, trying to reach the control center. No signal. Minutes felt like hours. The house shook. Rain poured through the cracks in the roof. She couldn't just wait. She couldn't lose another person. Not again. Cerise wrapped herself in a heavy cloak, tied a breathing mask around her face, and stepped outside. The storm was a monster of wind and dust, tearing at her clothes, pulling her hair free. She could barely see. But she followed the faint blue flicker of broken lights toward the generator zone. She found Elias half buried under fallen metal beams, blood running down his face. "Elias!" She screamed, dropping to her knees. He looked up weakly, his voice a whisper. "I told you to stay." Tears filled her eyes. "You shouldn't have come alone." Using all her strength, she pushed the debris off him, her alien muscles straining until the metal bent. Elias coughed, trying to sit up. "Cerise, stop. It's too heavy." She shook her head. "You humans never learn when to quit." Finally, the beam fell aside, crashing into the mud. She pulled him close, half carrying, half dragging him toward the shelter. Every step was pain, every breath fire, but she didn't stop. By the time they reached the colony hall, her arms were bleeding from the cuts of flying debris. The doors opened, and the colonists gasped. The alien widow, the one they had mocked, was carrying their human protector. "Help him." She shouted, her voice breaking. People rushed forward, lifting Elias onto a table. The medic worked quickly, sealing wounds, checking vitals. Cerise stood nearby, her whole body shaking, her face streaked with rain and tears. When Elias opened his eyes again, it was hours later. She was sitting beside him, her hand wrapped around his. "You came after me," he whispered, his voice weak. "I wasn't going to let the storm take another home from me," she said softly. He tried to smile. "You're stubborn." "So are you," she replied. The medic stepped forward. "He'll live." Thanks to her. The colonists murmured in disbelief, staring at the alien woman who had saved one of their own. Cerise looked down, embarrassed by the attention. She only wanted him to be safe, nothing more. Later, when the storm finally ended, the sun broke through the clouds. Golden and quiet, the colony was half buried. Homes damaged, but people were alive. And everyone knew who had risked her life for them. That evening, Elias sat up slowly, his voice low. "You saved me, Cerise." She smiled faintly. "You saved me first." He looked at her for a long time, eyes soft. "The Empire was wrong about you. They were wrong about humans, too." she said. Silence fell between them, but it was different now, not awkward, but peaceful. He reached for her hand again, this time without hesitation. Outside, the colony lights flickered back to life, glowing against the dark horizon. The storm had taken much, but it had given something too. The truth, Elias Ward was no longer her keeper, and Ceres Vallon was no longer his punishment. They had crossed the line between duty and bond, between fear and trust, and as the wind died down, both of them finally understood. The sentence had ended, but the story between them had only just begun. The storm had passed, leaving the colony quiet under a pale sunrise. Dust hung in the air like fog, covering the broken houses and fallen fences. But among the ruins, people worked together, rebuilding piece by piece. For the first time, Ceres Vallon walked through the colony without hearing whispers. Children waved, and one woman offered her water, saying softly, "Thank you for saving him." Ceres smiled shyly, still not used to kindness. She spent the morning helping repair the power lines, her hands steady even though her body still ached from the storm. Everywhere she went, people looked at her with new eyes, not as a criminal, but as one of them. When she returned home, Elias Ward was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, pale but alive. He looked up when she approached, his rough voice gentle. "You shouldn't be working so soon." She shook her head. "I can't rest while everyone else rebuilds." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a soldier." "Maybe I learned it from one," she replied. They shared a quiet moment, watching the sunlight spread across the hills. It was strange. The world that had once punished them both now felt softer. As the days passed, Elias grew stronger. He walked with a limp at first, and Ceres would tease him. "You humans are fragile." He would grin back, "And you aliens are stubborn." The laughter between them came easier now. One evening, as they worked side by side in the greenhouse, Elias said quietly, "You could leave, you know." She looked at him, confused. "Leave?" "Yes," he said. "After what you did, the colony council would clear your record. You could go anywhere." Ceres was silent for a long time, her silver eyes reflecting the green glow of the plants. "Anywhere," she repeated softly. "But not here." He frowned. "You want to stay?" She nodded. "This is the first place I have ever felt safe." Elias didn't answer, but his heart felt warm in a way he hadn't known in years. That night, he sat by the window again, staring at the photo of his lost family. But this time, he wasn't staring at ghosts. Ceres was humming in the next room, her soft voice carrying through the quiet house. He closed his eyes and listened. Maybe, he thought, the universe had given him one more chance. The next morning, the colony held a gathering to thank the people who had helped during the storm. Ceres stood among them, nervous but proud. When the leader spoke her name, everyone applauded. She bowed her head, tears shining in her eyes. Afterward, children brought her flowers, simple wild blooms from the hills. Elias stood behind her, smiling silently. That night, they walked together to the edge of the colony, where the stars were clear. The twin moons of Vareth Prime hung low, their light soft and blue. Ceres looked up, whispering, "I used to think the stars were prison bars," Elias asked quietly. "And now?" She smiled. "Now they look like open doors." He looked at her then, truly looked, and saw not a stranger, but someone who had become part of his soul. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Ceres," he said, "do you ever think the Empire planned this?" She laughed softly. "No, they only know how to punish, not how to heal." He nodded, his eyes gentle. "Then maybe the universe did." For a while, they stood in silence, the night wrapping around them like a soft blanket. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "Elias, do you regret it, that I came here?" He shook his head slowly. "At first, yes." Then he smiled faintly. "Now, it's the only thing I'm grateful for." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. Without thinking, she stepped closer and rested her forehead against his shoulder. He placed a hand on her back, holding her like something precious. No words were needed. Everything had already been said by their actions. Above them, the stars shimmered brighter, like witnesses to something sacred. The sentence that once chained two lives had become something entirely different. It had become a promise. Days turned to weeks, and life slowly returned to normal. But nothing truly went back to how it was. Elias and Cerise worked together, shared meals, laughed at small things. The colony began to see them not as human and alien, but as one. One evening, as the sun set in gold and violet, Cerise turned to him and said, "You were my keeper once, but now—" He smiled, finishing her thought. "Now we keep each other," she laughed, a sound like wind chimes in the quiet air. And as night fell over the world that had once been her prison, Cerise Vallon realized that sometimes the cruelest punishments hide the kindest fates. Elias Ward had been her sentence, but he had become her freedom. What began as an order from an empire had turned into a bond written by the stars. And in that bond, across species, pain, and silence, they had found what both thought lost forever, a home.